Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Hey, so sorry I'm late. I just had to... I came dressed for the wrong red, didn't I? Yeah. You're already doing better than me, man. I came dressed as the Red Album. That's a mustache made out of notebook paper.
Well, I'm aware of that much.
There really is no helping either of you, is there? Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. This is just gonna be one of those weeks where we have audio issues literally right when I sat down to film. Somebody decided to bring out a big ass leaf blower, like one of those ones so loud that I can hear it from 2 blocks away. I don't know. At least people aren't mowing their lawns in the rain. And this is one of those special weeks where I hadn't really interacted with the album at hand before it came up in the queue. I knew I had to cover it because it's just too big to ignore. I'll be completely honest, I was dreading this at first, but as you'll hopefully see through this episode, there's absolutely cause for celebration, because this very anxious album transformed my anxiety into anxious anticipation. I'm really excited to give this to you all today. This week, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of King Crimson Red. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you get to pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you wish to do so, the written version of just the album review is available on my website, linked in the description. Alright, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a repress. It's a really nice half-speed master by EG Records' Collector's Edition from 1987. Looking through King Crimson fan forums, there's apparently controversy over this series amongst audiophiles, saying it's way too bright. I don't know, man. I have no problems with the low end on my copy. I actually think the dynamics are quite nice. But then again, my setup was built expressly for the first 4 Black Sabbath albums, so it's really heavy on the bass. Now let's talk about this cover art. We have photography by Jared Mankiewicz. He's best known for his shots of the Rolling Stones. We've got a stark, high-contrast black and white photo of the 3 guys. Redditors seem to think this cover was inspired by With the Beatles, but I couldn't help but clock the similarities between the back cover and VU. I'll give you a little side-by-side right here, same color scheme and everything. Interesting. The red cover was designed by John Kosh, who was responsible for the Beatles' Abbey Road. But I'll be honest, guys. The red cover, it's not good. The font is awful, the border is awful, it's bland, it doesn't reflect the music at all. Given how well King Crimson covers have represented the music in the past, In the Court of the Crimson King, Islands, Lark's Tongues, Red was a huge disappointment. This is the most middle-aged prog rockers in the 1980s cover that the 1970s ever produced. Now that we're through with all of that, on Red, we have the last lineup of the original run of King Crimson. That's John Wetton on lead vocals and bass, Bill Bruford on drums and percussion, and the madman behind it all, Robert Fripp, on guitar, mellotron, and keys. We have a number of King Crimson alumni on our special guests roster. David Cross on violin, Mel Collins on soprano sax, and founding member Ian MacDonald returns playing alto sax. We also have Robin Miller on oboe, Mark Charig on cornet, kind of a mini trumpet, and 2 mystery players on cello and double bass. Nobody bothered to write these down, but considering Ian MacDonald could play literally everything, I would not be surprised if it was him. Red was produced by King Crimson, engineered by George Chikantz. Roll transition. It's not often that I get to cover the very beginnings of a band like I got to do with King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King episode. Even rarer that I get to cover their very beginnings, then skip all the way to the end of the original run. A lot has changed in that time. A lot of things have changed for these guys. So here's a brief history of the last 5 years of King Crimson, I guess. Okay, so remember this lineup? Yeah, throw the whole thing out the window. Ian MacDonald has pieced out of King Crimson. He's replaced by another multi-instrumentalist, Mel Collins, and pianist Keith Tippett. Greg Lake sticks around for one more album, 1970s, In the Wake of Poseidon, before forming his own group with King Crimson's opening act, The Nice. Yeah, don't worry about them. They'll be just fine. But Greg is so unbelievably on his way out from King Crimson that he won't even play bass. He's just gonna sing. Gordon Haskell is also here singing. Robert Fripp is playing guitar, so who's flying the plane? Peter Giles! Peter was bassist of the proto-King Crimson, Giles, and Fripp. Now they've basically reunited Giles, and Fripp for In the Wake of Poseidon. And nothing else, because Peter and Michael Giles both leave. Gordon's still on board for Lizard, but now we need a drummer. Enter Andy McCulloch. Now, I don't know what the hell happened during Lizard sessions to make him do this. Not only does Andy leave the band after Lizard, he retires from music completely to build yachts? Okay. Who else leaves? Like, everyone but Keith Tippett. Boz Burrell and Ian Wallace joined to keep the boat afloat through Islands in 71. But surprise, surprise, this lineup is a one-album wonder as well. All of the above bow out after this album, and I mean all of the above. Principal lyricist Peter Sinfield parts ways with the group. Cue a hard relaunch of King Crimson with John Wetton on bass and lead vocals, David Cross on violin, Bill Bruford, who jumped ship from Yes to be here, that is a story for another day, and Jamie Muir. They release Lark's Tongues in Aspic in 1973. Before throwing out half-studio, half-live albums Starless and Bible Black to buy them some time, Jamie leaves the band to become a fucking monk. King Crimson lore goes crazy! There was no sign of slowing down heading into 1974. Fripp told Melody Maker about their work schedule, quote, "From January to February, we made an album, then went to Europe for a tour, then immediately off to America, back to Britain for rehearsals, and straight back to America for another tour. After that, I had one full day off in the country. With that kind of life, there's a lot of things I'd like to do, but can't." This last tour Fripp was talking about was overshadowed by the looming threat of obsolescence. Since Lark's Tongues' release in the spring of 73, King Crimson had been losing traction in the States, where past lineups once enjoyed consistent chart success. Now, which prog giants finally broke through in the States in the spring of 1973? Oh, the Pink Floyd of it all. They emerged with a much more commercially accessible sound than Wetton's King Crimson, and they had a more stable lineup. King Crimson, quite literally, had a different lineup with each album. Floyd, a stable, for now at least, group with mainstream appeal to boot, edged avant-garde and unpredictable King Crimson out. This waning relevance wasn't helped by a massive financial burden on the group. Fripp said, quote, "Touring means engaging in enormous financial responsibilities. Keeping a group on tour for a year represents an investment between $100 and $200 million. I don't know about that, but it is pretty expensive. I'm saying like $100,000 to $200,000 range. Quote, same thing for recording an album. In 1974, King Crimson did not earn money by touring. They only lost it. And fiddle-dee-dee! The lineup changes again! By the end of that very tour Fripp mentioned, David Cross either quit or was fired. The Ultimate Classic Rock article seems to allude to David quitting, but Red's Wikipedia page phrases it this way. The decision was made to ask David to leave the band. Okay, that's weird. According to Fripp, it was E.G. Records' decision to drop David. E.G. advised him not to tell David he was getting fired until after this tour concluded. Management would do it themselves. Now, buckle up, because this is where things get a little complicated. According to Fripp, he objected to withholding this information, but he agreed to allowing E.G. to deliver the news on the condition that they said Fripp objected to not telling David he was getting fired, even though Fripp literally agreed to not telling David that he was getting fired. Am I missing something here? Going into what would become Red, Fripp was disheartened by how unsettled things were with the band personally. This seems quite out of character for the driven, full steam ahead creative visionary we know him as today. A little lineup change never bothered him, and how stagnant they were creatively. This is more in line with his character. His focus was split at the moment. He'd linked up with Brian Eno for a couple records and developed this loop effect thing called Frippertronics. Why does this sound like an Inspector Gadget villain? It really surprised me to learn that Fripp was so burnt out, John and Bill took the wheel for Red. In Will Romano's Mountains Come Out of the Sky, The Illustrated History of Prog Rock, John said, quote, Fripp said he wanted to take a back seat because we wasn't sure where this was going. Bill and myself knew exactly where it was going. You can hear it from the first track. This band is not fucking about. King Crimson's Red. Fuck about, find out. Where were they going? They were shooting for the stars. Red was King Crimson's big bid for mainstream success. And there was tension because of that, about the direction their music was going in come 1974. David said, quote, there was less and less room for musical doubt, ambiguity, vulnerability. The more sensitive expressions that had been sustainable at the beginning of the band were not there at the end. There was also less humor. Bill and John achieved an incredibly powerful and imaginative coalition. They couldn't understand why their front line, Fripp and David, didn't want to constantly wail over the top of it. Basically, John and Bill wanted prog cream, David wanted 70s Jefferson Airplane, and Fripp had no clue what he wanted anymore, which doesn't pair well with his authoritarian leadership style. Yeah, let's call it that. Bill used some very strong words to describe it. Quote, one part Joseph Stalin, one part Mahatma Gandhi, and one part the Marquis de Sade. Robert Fripp wants what Robert Fripp wants, but now he doesn't know what he wants, and he's gonna make it everyone's problem. Hey, so remember when I said E.G. Records was supposed to tell David Cross that he was getting fired? Yeah, they dropped the ball. They forgot to tell David he was getting fired. Poor guy didn't know he was out of a job until the day before Red sessions began. Whichever poor E.G. intern was supposed to deliver that memo absolutely got fired. Whatever happened, David had no hard feelings. Towards Bill and John, at least. When asked in an interview in 1999 about his experience in the band, he said, quote, my famous colleagues treated me just fine. Bill particularly went to great lengths to help me understand what he was doing. Socially, Robert didn't drink and kept himself to himself, so I probably spent more downtime with Bill and John. Particularly John, who enjoyed a good party. Red was recorded at the singular location I have mentioned the most on this series, Olympic Studios in London. The process was very separate. There wasn't much camaraderie in the studio. Bill would go home as soon as his tracks were done. Fripp recorded his parts by himself. Considering how fraught things were, it's not surprising that the bones of these songs were resurrected from earlier iterations of the band. Fallen Angel came from the 1972 tour, and Starless was in fact meant to be the title track of Starless and Bible Black. The song was originally titled Starless and Bible Black, but when it didn't make the cut for Starless and Bible Black, they titled another song Starless and Bible Black. When he appeared on the Boffamundo show, John seemed pretty miffed that Starless didn't make the cut for the intended album.
I got a totally cold reaction. Nobody liked it. So I pouted and stumped out of the rehearsal. Then lo and behold, about 8 months later when we were recording Red, both Robert and Bill said, hey, what about that song that you came up with last time? And I said, oh, you mean this one, Starless and Bible Black? Yeah, it's a great tune, that, you know. And
Did you say what?
I was open-mouthed.
Even with some extra manpower in the form of ex-members Ian MacDonald and Mel Collins, the guys couldn't manage quite enough material to round out a full LP, leading to the inclusion of a live track, Providence, named after the city it was recorded in. The track listing of Red goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the title track, Red, followed by Fallen Angel. And closing out side 1, we have One More Red Nightmare. Opening up side 2, we have Providence. And closing out the album, we have Starless. Red was released October 6th, 1974, 50 years ago this Sunday. The anniversary fell on kind of a weird day of the week for me. I can't control when the Mondays are. Also 50 years ago this week, Robert Fripp announced the end of King Crimson, quote, forever and ever. This was a real shock. The guys had a massive tour plan for this thing. The Americas, the UK, the rest of Europe, and Japan. And just like that, Fripp flung it out the window. That was kind of a wimpy toss, I'm sorry about that. It seems as though he got super freaked out over the idea of a world tour and canned it by canning the band. John, in particular, was crushed by this.
I just sort of went, you know.
He felt that they were on the precipice of something huge with Red, and touring it would have only elevated King Crimson's star.
What do you say when somebody's just sort of taking away your best toy, you know?
He was also really hoping for Ian MacDonald to rejoin the band full-time. The breakup announcement didn't boost Red's sales much. It charted for a whopping 1 week before swan diving into obscurity. To add insult to injury, for that 1 week Red charted, it didn't even break the top 20. As we clearly know today, Fripp was very wrong about the forever and ever part, but this was the last King Crimson album of the 1970s. At the time, considering the comparative commercial failure of Red and its lyrical content, Fripp's statement to the NME felt very final, as did Fripp's joint statement to Melody Maker, published in the issue the day before Red's release. Quote, "It was quite a superb band, but nevertheless, what we were doing wasn't really for me." Damn! Hit us with the past tense and everything. Quote, "There had been, apparently, no traumatic personality clashes within the band, no final bust-up. Robert Fripp had simply decided it was time for King Crimson to come to an end." That much is true. He felt King Crimson were dinosaurs. The rest of the music industry hadn't quite come to this conclusion yet, but he could sense that prog had jumped the shark. They throw out a live album in 75, but other than that, King Crimson goes dormant for the rest of the decade. What did the guys get up to on their hiatus? John went on tour with Roxy Music, and I quote, "as a joke," then co-founded UK and Asia. It seems he was really hung up on that world tour thing. Bill played with Roy Harper for a bit, then did time with fellow prog giants Genesis. He played with UK some too, before forming his own group, Bruford. And Robert Fripp dropped off the face of the earth for 5 years. Not. He does some serious side questing, beginning with the classic rock and roll cliche of going on a spiritual journey to find yourself or whatever. Considering Bill's Stalin statement, yeah, Fripp probably needed it. He joined the International Academy for Continuous Education at the Sherborne House in 1975. In this BBC Whistle Test special from the 80s, he says, "One of the most accidentally profound things I've ever heard."
Part of me recognized something which all the rest of me had to go along with.
He threw himself behind J.G. Bennett's teachings and Gurdjieff and establishing them in America, where he moved for a time, and ended up teaching guitar lessons in Virginia. He stayed tight with Brian Eno, contributing to a handful of songs on David Bowie's Heroes and Scary Monsters. He produced a record for ex-Genesis singer Peter Gabriel, which he was apparently thoroughly disappointed with. Guested for Talking Heads and Blondie. Tried to reform television expressly so he could be in the band. Relatable, honestly. Jammed with the B-52s, I'd pay money to see that. Tried to start a farm and produced an album for... Hold on. No, that can't be right. That can't be right. Holy shit. Daryl Hall? Fripp made his grand return to the spotlight with a couple solo albums and reforming King Crimson again for discipline. In the 50 years since Red's release, it's gone from commercial flop to beloved cornerstone of King Crimson history. Kurt Cobain cited it as an influence on Nirvana's In Utero, though this is Kurt Cobain talking here. He once said Philosophy of the World was one of his favorite albums. Being much more straightforward, I'm sure. Ian MacDonald asserted it was the band's most important album in a long time. Quote, Robert defined the band and found his voice, as far as I'm concerned, guitar-wise. In 2001, Q Magazine ranked it among the 50 heaviest albums of all time. Rolling Stone ranked it the 15th greatest prog album of all time on their 2015 list. So, what do I think of Red? Going in. Holy shit. Among all the groups in my collection, my relationship with King Crimson stands out as unique. I love In the Court of the Crimson King. It wrote the rulebook for prog rock, and in doing so, transcended prog. It's practically proto-metal. No wonder I love it. I've made my adoration of Islands pretty public. I rank it way higher than most King Crimson fans do. And Lark's Tongues, it's beautiful, it's terrifying. I'm still kicking myself for missing its 50th anniversary. Lark's Tongues would be one of the great challenges of my career. And here we are at Red, an album that admittedly wasn't on my radar until it turned up in my P.O. box. Initially, the album art turned me off from it. I was expecting washed-up middle-aged proggers in the 80s. Instead, I was met with one of the most brilliant prog albums I've ever heard. Before I get into the album itself, I want to circle back to a question I asked in the Court of the Crimson King episode. Is it possible that Robert Fripp's obsession with changeability may have hindered his group? Well, ladies, gentlemen, and cretins of caves, we have our answer. From the man himself in interview in 1979, quote, I never let King Crimson fall into the success trap. Several times we went very close to having a gigantic commercial success. I have always instinctively tried to avoid this. The question I pose to you all this time around, is Fripp a master of self-sabotage or a mastermind? That much is up to you. Whichever it is, man, is it interesting to read about Fripp at this time. He had this superiority-inferiority complex thing. They were constantly at odds, and the lack of control plus a fear of a more commercial, bigger future, like, triggered the sleeper cell and activated him to kill King Crimson. It is wild to me that this was their last album of the 1970s. In a way, it makes sense that they would bow out now. Come 1975 and 76, prog would be thoroughly out of fashion in favor of punk. There just wouldn't have been the space for them anymore. At the same time, this is King Crimson we're talking about here. The group that thrived through unpredictability. How would I describe Red? It's like if Lark's Tongues and the first Black Sabbath album had a baby, and that baby got a hold of a copy of Houses of the Holy. This thing sounds huge. Experiencing Red's sonic magnitude for the first time felt like the ending scene of Tommy, where Roger Daltrey's got his arms stretched out before the boiling orange sun. As for how Red compares to its predecessor, Lark's Tongues sounds menacing. It's a yarn ball of sound. When you listen, you get the sense that it's been here before you and it will be here after you. You feel like you're staring into a black hole that's just about to suck you in. Red's got that yarn ball quality. It's got that black hole quality, but I don't get a sense that it'll be here after me. Sam Sodomsky for Pitchfork said that Red, quote, doesn't feel like a eulogy. I disagree. Red feels like I'm witnessing the end of band and the end of days. We begin the end with the title track, Red. This is an immediate, urgent, and aggressive way to kick things off, with its constant, unsettled upward motion. There are these lofty, anthemic moments, brief chords to rest our feet on, but everything about Red is ascension until it can't hold itself up anymore. Bill's drumming in particular. Bill Bruford was really the main attraction of this era of King Crimson. We'll see it over and over again on this record. Buried in this sheet of sound are meticulously mangled licks by Fripp, and there's hardly any space on the disc before it kicks in. I've got like one whole second to brace myself. When I first heard these chords in this sequence, I had to double check if this was really made in 1974, because these are some of the most 90s chords I've ever heard on a mid-70s album. And this was before I found out Kurt Cobain name-dropped this. I may have bought my stereo system for $20 at a yard sale. It may have been packed in shoeboxes, but this little surround sound has always treated the bass guitar like a fucking king. No pun intended. When you take a track like Red and put it on this system, it sounds like I'm sat right in front of John's amp, and that's exactly where I want to be. This thing flies off my turntable. I know everyone hails George Chicance as the father of phasing and all, and this is a massive sounding record, but I have to point out one really sloppy edit that the mix on streaming services seems to have fixed. Right before John comes in, it's like the volume on everything just very suddenly drops. When I talk about intentional, smooth sound design, like how the vocals and guitars swap spots on Disraeli gears, yeah, the lead into Fallen Angel is the exact opposite. Anyway, John's got a plaintive David Gilmour-esque quality to his voice. It's the ground wire composition like this desperately needs. The bass is killer on this one as well, making its way into gritty territory. The days of Black Queens, Fire Witches, and Crimson Kings are long gone on Fallen Angel. Aside from the callback to Days of Yore via the oboe, there's not a lick of whimsy to be had on this album, and the opening lines prove it. 16 years of knife fights and danger. Strangely, why is life not mine? These are very real characters in a very real story of stinging switchblades and exploring a post-apocalyptic wasteland in New York City. And yet it's got this music behind it. Cosmically large, with 3 buzzing guitar solos cramped into one space. Then the frantic wailing through the final chorus that Fripp always did so well. It's math rock in meter, forming a doomed hexagon. Lines only broken by frankly ridiculous drum fills. It's also math rock in its use of trumpet, but that could just be me talking. I did have American football on pretty heavy rotation in college. Any other band would be lucky to have a monster like Fallen Angel as their album's closing track, but for these guys, it's just your run-of-the-mill track 2. It's handled casually, which is jarring considering how grand it is. Note the fade out. Any other band would be lucky to have One More Red Nightmare as a closing track 2 with its theatrical drama. John illustrates travel anxiety with this nightmare of a plane crash. Sweat began to pour down my neck as I turned around. I heard Fortune shouting, "Get off this outing!" I can't help but draw similarities to Rick Wright's travel anxiety tribute on Darkside. Reading the lyrics, Red Nightmare was likely written about King Crimson's grueling tour schedule. really safe and sound, asleep on the Greyhound, one more red nightmare, and the tensions it was causing, a farewell swan song, see, you know how turbulence can be. Now compare this to Ladies of the Road Off Islands, praising the groupies this gaggle of nerds somehow accumulated. Oh, fun fact, since we're on this topic, remember the what kind of beer scene in Almost Famous? Yeah, according to B.B. Buell, in an interview with Cameron Crowe, that was based off some King Crimson pulled.
What kind of beer?
Their attitude towards road life has completely changed. The percussion or hand claps, they're squishy. It's like I stepped in water while wearing socks, or I had to fish a slice of Wonder Bread out of the sink. I don't like it. I don't want it. Take it away from me, please. It's a lot easier to stomach on the vinyl version for some reason. I want to feel like I'm trudging through muddy trenches, but maybe not quite so literally. There's use of dynamics to give Bill the space to move, and move he does. Not to reference a recently disbanded neo-prog group, but he moves with a purpose, playing every single gap in the composition to his strength. There's fantastic use of positive and negative space on this one. And there's a wonderful contrast with John's looser approach to the bass in the refrains. I don't know what the hell time sig this is in, but it feels like a multiple of 5 before switching back to the frenetic verses. And my God, the ending. I wasn't expecting that at all. The last 2 minutes of Red Nightmare is like we were toiling away, sweating at this typewriter, chained to a rhythm, hammering repeating numbers and lines into infinity. Bill, riding the cymbal, plays the role of the clacking typewriter keys. I heard he found this cymbal in the trash. It sure sounds like he's playing a trash can lid. We're falling deep into this trance state, spiraling further and further, and then the paper is torn. That ending just cracks through the air. The binary we've been typing fails. The universe itself splits. Occam's razor slicing. I was left sitting there with my mouth agape. This is one of the greatest side 1 endings I have ever experienced. And then side 2 opens with fucking Providence. The final transmissions of Traveler David Cross before he's swallowed by the Red Star. He's much benefited by the absence of big bombastic riffs. On Providence, the guys use negative space and ambient noise to build suspense, fear even. If King Crimson did the Suspiria soundtrack, it might sound like Providence. David squealing and shrieking away is well suited to foreboding terror. It sends shivers up my spine. The first half of Providence reminds me of the work of Japanese composer Teiji Ito. He wrote music for his equally brilliant wife, the mother of experimental film Maya Deren. Listen to his score for Meshes of the Afternoon along with Providence and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Hearing the studio material on Red, I just can't find the space in the noise for David, but I wish there were still space for him in the band. Providence proves he was worthy of a seat at the table. Hear how the violin mingles with bending feedback, mischievous percussion, washes of cymbals. Keeping on with the Dead Star theme, Providence sounds like a looking at the void where a star once was and feeling dread, knowing that's exactly where your galaxy is headed. I gotta say, you can tell John wasn't too comfortable with jazz. He feels totally lost at times. It takes a while to grow its limbs, but this god's abomination eventually gestates into a staggering titan. Driven by the best bass line on the record, pushed and pulled by Bill on the kit. It's exciting, it's got a groove, but as soon as they find it, they drop it again. Providence is the evil twin of Moonchild. It's the sonic representation of brilliant minds turned into a ticking time bomb. We finish finish things off with the longest track on Red, Starless. The intended Starless in Bible Black. Yes, John got that from Dylan Thomas. Starless's intro is the sweetest moment on the whole record. Romantic, even. Fripp's mellotron and airy guitar line, plus the saxophone, feel like a sweet send-off. This is John's best vocal performance on the whole album. He wistfully croons, "Sundown, dazzling day, gold through my eyes," letting those last words fall gently into the dust. But that's about as sweet as things are going to be. We're right back to the tragedy of it all with, "But my eyes turned within only see starless and..." God, that's a beautiful line. I mean, Starless is so introspective, observing the tragedy within as opposed to one taking place in a fantasy land. It's so anti-prog. Considering how lofty prog can be, overly so at times, John's grounded lyricism might be exactly what Red needs. Otherwise, I'd get to feeling this was too big to chew. One of the most striking moments on all of Red is Starless's tonal shift. The Pitchfork review described it as, quote, "the scene in a horror movie when the protagonist finds a place to hide that turns out to be a trap." That couldn't be a more perfect descriptor. John slowly whacks out his bass tone, percussion drips water on the cement. It's a scream at the screen moment. The monster staggers around the corner in the form of Bill's stiff drums. The bells crash and clang. It gets bigger and bigger, casting shadows on the ground. Fripp ekes out this tense, belabored, noisy, screeching solo, harkening back to the day the monster was born. Then scratching friction. "We can't escape this one now," and then it bursts into this amped up, ridiculous flurry. At times it seems superfluous to me, but when I can get into it, I gladly allow it to sink its teeth into me. It's indisputably the climax of Red. By the time the woodwinds harken back to the central motif, the band adding a new sense of urgency, I stare at the needle in anxious anticipation, watching it get closer and closer to the run out. I'm like, how the hell are they gonna wrap this up? It just keeps expanding, going on and on until it collapses into itself. And then you are left with the void that once was Red. My God. It's crazy to think that King Crimson went from this to this in 5 years. It's like Miles Davis going from Sketches of Spain to Bitches Brew. Think of that level of artistic evolution and then condense that time frame down to half. Not to mention all the shit in between. How the hell do I finish this off? I don't know. I've seen comments under these videos and notes in my inbox saying that Vinyl Monday has shaped your music taste. I always say the viewers move Vinyl Monday. Today, a viewer shaped my music taste by placing this record in my hands. Red was a very special experience. One I haven't had in years, not since I inherited the skeleton of this record collection and listened to a different album every day for a year have I felt this expansion of my music taste. Felt it. And I haven't been this moved by an album in a long time. I stared into the void of a dying star and I lived to tell the tale. I want a t-shirt that says, "I survived Red." Lord knows Fripp deserves the shirt too. This album is the collapse of a band, the end of an era, and the end of days, all in one. One of the most acute expressions of anxiety ever put to music, an expression of the dying gasp. It's existential dread incarnate, staring into the night sky and knowing that at least one of those stars has already died. It's just taking millions of years for its last light to get to us. And knowing one day someone in another galaxy is gonna look at our dead sun like that. Red is the fall of the Titans. My personal favorites are the whole thing. If you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is King Crimson's Red 50 years later. What do you think of this album? What do you think of this iteration of King Crimson? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet has to tell you, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11, a new episode of the Dolls podcast every other Friday, and this is a Vinyl Monday first because next week's album hasn't arrived in the mail yet, so I can't hold it up. Thanks for watching. I'll see you for whatever that is. Bye!